please welcome Denise Scott back to the stage.
Okay. I'm bringing on Sharon Lee, the Executive Director of the Low-Income Housing Institute in Seattle, Washington. Sharon, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, how many people know the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom unit in Seattle? Some of you absolutely do know, because I know there are some bankers here. Anyway, I live in Seattle, and there is a severe, devastating affordable housing shortage. The average rent for a 2-bedroom unit is $2,700 a month. We have one of the most costly markets in the entire United States. We're number 10. So can you imagine from last year to this year, rents have gone up 10%, so we've beat out most major cities. The unfortunate thing is that homelessness has increased 19% since a year ago. Maybe some of you have participated in the one-night count or point-in-time count. Well, in Seattle, volunteers fanned out in January, and they found 4,500 people living unsheltered on the streets. We're not talking about people who are living in transitional housing or people who are living in shelters. We're talking about people who are in cars, bushes, under bridges, living in tents, and just, you know, the cold, wet sidewalk. And it's not just the stereotype of the single men who are out there. It's 500 homeless families with children, and it's 800 homeless young adults. It's an unbelievable situation. Only 2 cities have homeless populations larger than Seattle, New York and LA. The situation is so bad that the county medical examiner documented 91 men and women who died living on the streets from exposure, violence, depression and suicide, and drugs. There are more people dying from being homeless than the homicide rate. Unbelievable. 6 women were homicide victims last year, and 3 of them were homeless at the time of their death. Margaret Pinka, age 41, she was napping inside her tent near downtown when she was shot by a gunman who fired through the tent. Stacy Davis, 48, she was beaten to death with a homemade club, and her husband was seriously injured. They were attacked when they were sleeping under a bridge in a tent. Death from homelessness is totally preventable. So during my career, I head up a housing nonprofit, Low-Income Housing Institute, or we call it LIHI for short. We've developed over 4,000 affordable housing units. We've done the whole thing, you know, transitional, permanent housing, workforce housing, housing first, homeownership housing. Anyway, you can understand, I'm sure you do, it takes so long, right? It takes 3 to 4 years, if we're lucky, to find a property, put together the financing. It takes a year to get permits in Seattle, and then a year and a half to build. So even though we're being really good at getting tax credits, we're using tax credits for permanent supportive housing, it just takes too long while people are vulnerable and dying on the streets of Seattle. Of course, it would be great if there were some new national housing initiatives that we could count on, like the Universal Housing Voucher Program, or Maria Cantwell, Senator Cantwell has a tax credit, you know, expanded tax credit program. Do we know if that's going to go anywhere? Full funding for the National Housing Trust Fund, and other ways to prevent evictions and uncontrolled rents. Now, some of you might say, well, why are all these people on the streets? Why aren't they living in shelters? Well, I'll tell you why. First of all, many of the shelters are crowded, and many people don't want to live in shelters, or they can't live in shelters. I'll give you an example. If you're a mother with a few children, maybe they'll let you in. If you're a father with kids, you may not get in. If you're a mother with a teenage son, you may not get in. If you're a family with pets, you will probably not get in. If you're a gay lesbian couple, or even a couple with kids, you may not get in. So shelters are not working for everybody. And also, you don't know who you're sleeping next to in the shelter, and there's also the problem of bed bugs, and you have to get out, and you come in at night and you have to get out in the morning, and where are you going to put your belongings? So we realized there is a possible, practical, and affordable solution we want to talk to you about. Instead of people living in a car or on a tent, why not build tiny houses and tiny house villages so that people can stay safe and dry and protected? So right now we have 60 of these tiny houses built by volunteers. And each house can house 1 to 4 people, and it's very affordable. They're also, if you think about the image, the stereotype, like people do not like to see tents, in their great cities, right? But when you look at this, we have hundreds of volunteers who want to come and help build tiny houses because there's the emotional response to living in a house, and people can really relate to this. So a few years ago, my agency partnered with a grassroots organization called Nicholsville, and they set up self-managed tent encampments. They organize homeless people to live cooperatively. So for instance, there's somebody doing kitchen duty, someone doing security, someone taking out the trash. It's sort of like, your old shared, shared house situation when we were all younger. So there's no weapons, no drugs, no alcohol, no violence. And so they have a community which is empowered to run the daily operations. So we partnered with them because we purchased a piece of land. And this piece of land was going to be a future tax credit project, but we didn't get funded. So my board said, well, why don't we let let's let this tent encampment stay there for a year. And we ended up with 45 tents. We had good relations with the community. And one day, Home Depot Foundation came and said, gee, we want to build something for veterans. Remember the days of the priority for veterans? So Home Depot Foundation donated the wood, and we found out that you could have all these volunteers build tiny houses in a day or two. And so that's exactly what happened. And so soon, everybody who was living in a tent wanted a tiny house. And then last year, Seattle Mayor Ed Murray and the City Council passed an ordinance legalizing tiny house villages and tent encampments. And actually, the city went through their entire inventory of public property and identified 7 properties that could be used. The city also agreed to pay for water, electricity, supplies, wood, tents. And then my agency and Nicholsville were selected as the operator. So how does it work? Yes, they're small. Well, how small are they? They're 120 square feet or less. And why is that? Because we found out that if you build a tiny house that's under 120 square feet, it's less than what the IBC, International Building Code, would consider a dwelling unit, then we would not have to meet permitting, we would not have to meet land use or the energy code. So we're basically doing guerrilla housing. We're finding a loophole. I'll tell you how far it went. We actually have a church-owned property that's zoned single family, and we have 14 tiny houses, and each of them is under 120 square feet. And so we are actually green and energy efficient, and we have a small carbon footprint. So the building department said to us, okay, we're going to allow this. I mean, we do have a crisis around homelessness. And we said to them, well, how about a shower? We want to have plum showers, and we want to have toilets and handicapped toilets and running water. And they said, as long as you make sure your shower pavilion is under 120 square feet and make sure your toilet pavilion is under 120 square feet. So that's what we built. So as an example, today, we have Othello Village, which has 70 people living there, including 20 children. A family of 7 showed up one night, and we put them side by side in 2 tiny houses. So how is this cost effective? We use volunteers. Hundreds of people show up when we ask for volunteers on Facebook. High school students, college students, especially church groups, vocational apprenticeship programs. We even have contractors, businesses. So many people are interested in helping to end homelessness, and this is a very small, simple thing they can do. They can also donate $2,200 for a house, and that's all it costs in terms of material. And so people are donating the amount for a single house, or they're donating $1,100 for half a house or a quarter of a house. So if you belong to a church group, this could be something you could do. Or if your school has a community service learning project, they could paint one of these. Now, pictured on the upper right is Ashley and her 3-year-old son. She was in foster care and became homeless. She and her son actually lived in the tiny house with the trees, and her house was donated by middle school students. So Ashley has painted a blue sky with clouds on the ceiling of her tiny house to cheer herself up. But I want to make it very, very clear, living in a tiny house is not seen as a dead end or a long-term solution. With the help of city funding, we have 2 case managers, and they move people quickly into housing, into permanent and transitional housing. So Ashley only lived in the tiny house for 3 months. And guess where she is now? She is living in a permanent tax credit financed building that we just built and leased up, and the equity investor was NEF. Thank you. And she became the poster child for the Seattle Housing Levy. So when you see her picture, the housing levy passed with 70% voter approval for the citizens of Seattle to tax themselves, and it will generate $290 million for low-income housing. So over a very short period of time, our social workers have moved 106 people into housing, and 68 people got employment. And then we also have flexible funding so that if it doesn't make sense for them to stay in Seattle, we will offer them transportation home or back to their support system. So many communities, I'm sure you know about, they need a creative solution and a new idea to respond to homelessness. I ask you to join the movement to move vulnerable people off the streets, out of tents, into tiny houses. Being homeless should not be fatal. Imagine how many people could benefit by living in a tiny house. Imagine how you can help. Thank you.
Sharon, I have a feeling that the tiny house concept is going to catch on. So thank you for leading us. I'm wondering, what was the opposition like? You talked about Home Depot as a business that came to help, but what about the nearby neighbors and maybe small businesses in the area where the tiny houses were built? How did people react when you first started talking about that?
Well, in one community, which is a very middle-class white community called Ballard, sort of Swedish, Norwegian community, there was serious opposition from the Ballard Chamber of Commerce, and they actually had a change.org petition sent to the mayor opposing it. And then it delayed the opening of the community, and now the head of the Chamber of Commerce is the head of the Community Advisory Council, and is totally supportive of the tent encampment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
And then I want to say that Othello Village is located in southeast Seattle, which is a racially diverse community. And we also had one located in the International District, which is mostly Asian and immigrant refugee communities. And we had a very different response. The immigrant refugees said, well, we were homeless. When we arrived in the United States, we were all homeless. And homeless people here are getting a bad rap, right? And so there's been the neighbors have been wonderful. They bring donations. The churches bring donations. They offer to help, and people have been donating and coming and volunteering. And so I think I think the key thing is that we let the residents, people who have experience living in a tiny house village, we let them speak for themselves at the community meeting, and then they win people over.
That's right. Questions? I know you all must have some questions. Yes.
And can you give us 30 seconds on what caused the head of the Chamber of Commerce to change?
Well, the city ordinance actually included a community notification process. There had to be 2 public meetings before the opening of the village, and there had to be a 7-member advisory committee. And the 7-member advisory committee, which is good, it basically said no more than 7, so it couldn't be like 25 people, right? So essentially there was a church person, a business person, a neighbor, like a nonprofit, and the chamber would all be part of that 7. And then they would set the tone. They would say, okay, let's evaluate how things are going every month. Let's look at the number of people who are getting housing, the number of people who are getting jobs. Let's look at the incidence of, if there are problems. And so because it functions so well with total transparency in terms of some of the problems, the Chamber of Commerce person became the chair of the committee, and he's been totally supportive.
Yes. Steve?
Seems like there's a lot of dynamics at play, for an enclave like that. So what's your learning right now in terms of what needs the most resources? Is it the caseworkers? Is it safety? Is it construction, materials?
Well, that is a really good question. We have a lot of people volunteering who want to build these houses, and then we have a lot of, we actually have houses being built like maybe there's 10 houses being built as we speak, like the youth build, the vocational colleges, a bunch of high school students are building them. And so we have, the problem is land, is finding the next village, where are we gonna put all these new houses, right? One thing, I'll tell you a big secret, is that once my board voted to put the village on our on our new development site, initially before the tent encampment got there, we applied for funding, we didn't get funding. We applied again, we didn't get funding. And then we put the tent encampment, and then all of a sudden we got funding. So the tent encampment is there for a year or 2. And so we've taken, this is now a new development strategy we have. So we have a, we have a new site.
That's great. Yes, one more question. Go ahead.
There was a little bit of this tried in Los Angeles, and the city wasn't supportive. They ended up confiscating some of the homes for health concerns and abandoned property reasons, everything. Can you talk a little bit about the role that the local government played? Were they supportive right off the bat? Did they need to be convinced? And what can we learn in terms of building the appropriate support structure to have this happen elsewhere?
Okay, so, and just so you know, something similar happened in Portland as well, and also Denver. There are some grassroots organizations, and they've been watching Tiny House Nation, and where everything is on wheels, right? And the problem with the zoning code often is that if you have things on wheels, even if they're tiny houses, you have to put them in an RV lot or a mobile home lot, right? So that's the first thing, is are you gonna put, these are on pier blocks, on concrete blocks, as opposed to wheels. So we made sure that we didn't have to fight that battle, right, as to whether we belong in a mobile home park instead of, regular property. And then the building department basically gave us the formula. They said, okay, 120 square feet. I understand that in some other jurisdiction, you can do it up to 150 square feet, but I haven't like totally checked it out. So there is nationally, there's a religious ordinance because churches can provide sanctuary. You could do this more freely on church-owned or church-controlled land, okay? And then you can definitely do it on city-owned land, which is what the city has allowed us to use their land for this purpose. And then private land, which is why the city has a sanctioned legal encampments on public and private property. So we have a wonderful mayor and a city council that unanimously supported this. And this is, by the way, after 7 years of housing activists and homeless activists squatting and protesting, and it was not it took a while to get them to change their position.
Thank you. Thank you. Great work, Sharon. This is good.